My audience is mostly emergency medicine folks, physicians, PAs, nurses, EMTs, paramedics, and your topics are very applicable to those folks because they deal with time management issues and burnout issues galore, and those are a lot of topics that we focus on a lot here. So I think you'll have some great insight.
Well, before we start, I have to share something with you. I was just at a book writing retreat this last weekend, and I'm going to be writing a book about the art of bending time. And one of the things that they asked us was about the origin story. Do you have like a watershed moment? Was there something that happened that caused you, kind of flipped you on your head and forced you into the position of
Hmm.
having to learn what you learned, right? Mine was at an emergency room.
Really?
Yeah. I thought I had appendicitis and went to
Oh.
the emergency room because on the second day of lying on it was the weirdest thing. Like I felt okay if I was standing up, but if I laid down on my back in bed, I was in this
Huh.
horrible pain and I couldn't figure out what was going on. But all I could think the first night, after about an hour of this, I fell asleep. Second night, I woke up. I was laying there and I'm like, it's 3 in the morning now. I'm still laying there. I'm still in pain. I'm standing
Yeah.
up once in a while. I'm fine. I lie down. I'm in pain. And all I could think is I'm going to be that person who like dies of sepsis after their appendix burst because they're like too proud of their pain
Yeah.
tolerance to go to the hospital, right? So I go to the hospital and at the hospital, they were like, you have elevated liver enzymes. They did an ultrasound, they didn't find anything. So they're like, well, it could be a gallstone we can't see. So what do I do? Of course, they tell me to go to a gastro, but did I? Of course not, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, I can fix this with diet. I'm not going to go to a doctor to fix gallstones and have them tell me to get surgery and all that. And
Right.
I proceed to get into exercise, start eating better, lose 35 pounds in the best shape of my life. Like a year later, I'm feeling amazing. And I had a UTI and I had blood testing run, and my elevated liver enzymes had doubled.
Oh, gee.
And the doctor was like, I think you better go to the doctor this time. Turned out I had PBC.
Oh,
And they
okay.
never would have found that,
Oh,
it's
no.
the kind of
Yeah,
thing
no.
like, I mean, it's so weirdly rare that most people wouldn't know. But
Yeah.
getting that autoimmune diagnosis is what threw me into the whole trajectory of learning all about stress management, eating better, et cetera, et cetera. And I got a health coaching certification. And then I realized one day I had been super burned out and all of a sudden I wasn't. And I was like, wait a minute, what did I do? And I looked at
Yeah.
all this stuff and it was like, it was this eclectic mix of different things that I'd done over the course of about 10 years, where all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, like I actually like my job again. And I feel great in the morning and my body feels better than it did in my 30s and, all those things. So anyway, just thought I'd share that with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm really excited to talk to you. I kind of mentioned before, this podcast is directed towards pretty much everyone in emergency medicine, physicians, PAs, NPs, nurses, EMTs, paramedics, and we all deal with burnout a ton. All the, EMS folks I have on the show, we inevitably talked about burnout because we all struggle with this dynamic in our job where we get into it because we want to help people, and that kind of sustains us for a couple of years and maybe even less than a couple of years. And then you get this cycle of burnout where there's compassion fatigue. And I think the initial things that got you into the job kind of get put on the back burner and you're just there to work. You're just there to pay your bills. And we all kind of slip into this burnout, I feel like, inevitably, just because it's a high stress job. And I know you had a high stress job before. So I think diving into that topic will be really beneficial for folks. Um, you kind of talked about your background a little bit already and how you got into this. Um, let me ask you this first. Do you think that burnout is in our control, or should we be seeking external ways to fix burnout?
I think the burnout can be controlled by the way we approach and react to our world, if that makes sense. So no, I don't think that the things that burn us out are in our control. Clearly, when you're working in an emergency room and you have people coming in under a great deal of stress, It's life or death situations. You have, I'm sure, stressed out family members who are screaming at you, and a lot of administrative pressures from hospitals and all the stuff that goes on. And you know, that stuff is hard to deal with, and it's something that is that's not going away anytime soon. If you don't own the hospital and control the administration, you can't fix the way the administrators do things, for instance. You
Yeah.
can't fix the fact that insurance companies do the things insurance companies do and make it harder for you to do your job. But you can impact how you respond to that with how you look at the world. And one of the things that I've learned in the process, and I mentioned before that I had a long process of recovering from lawyer burnout, which I think is very different. You're subjected to immediate stress that's continuous, right? It's like you've got a bunch of people you see every day, and each incident is different, and it could be highly stressful. And then you go home and you're not in that at home. The difference with lawyers is we never see the result of what we do. Now, in a way, you don't either. You send somebody off to another doctor or they get admitted, and so what you did in the moment may or may not be something you ever find out what happened to that person.
Yeah.
Like that person who saw me for potential gallstones probably never found out that I had PBC, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Because why would they? Nobody's going to go back to the hospital and say, "Hey, and by the way,"
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know. And I've never had the chance to thank her for being part of a day that literally has changed the rest of my life, and in a very positive way. I mean, that sounds crazy that I have this weird autoimmune disease that started out as I thought I was going to die or need a transplant, right? And all of a sudden, I'm like, hey, this is like, I'm learning all this stuff. I've changed my life completely. I feel better than I did in my 30s. And I'm like, wow, that was what a gift.
Yeah.
And I think that that viewpoint, that kind of mindset shift is really, really important. One of the things that I teach every person that I coach and everyone I work with, and sometimes I do corporate workshops or I do keynotes, and I tell, I do a clarity exercise with people, and I help them to, in a pretty short meditation kind of context, visualize the things that light them up, the things that give them joy, the things that make them feel happy and fulfilled and proud, and all that stuff, right? We all have a collection of memories that are things that we can go, wow, okay, like I just felt really great in my body that day, and I won the running race, or I whatever it is that made you feel really good. And if you can drill down into what that is that made you feel good, what is it really about it? What were you physically doing? Who were you with? Were you part of a team? Is that what made you feel happy? Were you pushing your limits and you'd exceeded some goal you had, and that's what made you happy? Like, there's, for all of us, nobody's the same. We all have different things that light us up. And what I've found is if you can figure that out and you can get that into your life more often, whether it is at work or at home, then you're going to be really immune to burnout. Because
Yeah.
if what happens with burnout is you start feeling like what you're doing doesn't matter anymore, or it's unappreciated, or I hit a point when I was burned out as a lawyer where I felt bad about charging so much money for what I was doing. I was working inside a system, you'll relate to this, where I had to do all kinds of stupid stuff that was a waste of my time. And I had to charge my clients for the time I was spending doing it, even though it wasn't something I even felt was necessary, but the federal court required it, or it was part of the process, or the other side demanded something that took a lot of time to respond to. And so that was very frustrating to me. And I started feeling like that plus in law, you might do work today that you don't see a result from for 6 months or 8 months or a year.
Yeah.
And it's like, God, like you just feel like you're never seeing any results. And so you just feel like you're just working all the time and you're not getting any good feedback coming back the other direction. You know,
Yeah.
one thing I realized I was doing differently when I sat back and I looked back at it and went, what am I doing that's working here? Because I feel much better now than I did before. And I realized the most important thing was learning to be in the moment. And, they say that if you are thinking about the future all the time, you'll suffer anxiety.
Mm.
If you're thinking about the past all the time, you'll be depressed. And if you're in the moment and you can get in the flow state doing what you're doing, you're not going to do it. You're not going to feel either of those things. And you're going to be able to walk away feeling good about your day.
Mm.
And that was where I realized I'd made a big change, is that I had learned to get into the flow state frequently. And I wasn't anymore frustrating myself with regrets about what I hadn't accomplished or what I didn't do or what I had on my to-do list that I couldn't get to, or worrying about what was going to happen down the road if I didn't do what I quote unquote should have done. I allowed myself the grace to have done the best I could for that day and then move on.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. I think that's something we all struggle with, especially in emergency medicine, where maybe you are in your head about, am I going to get off on time? You're not mentally present necessarily with any given patient that you're with, because you're constantly thinking about other things like the stress of a previous shift, or am I working an extra shift, and you can't actually mentally focus on the patient in front of you. And I do find that I'm much more satisfied and fulfilled in my job when I'm actually focused on the given task that I'm actually doing.
So let me ask you, just to give an example to your audience of this kind of thing. If you were to sit back and you were to think about going back before you were a doctor, as a child, as a young adult, what would you say were the things that really lit you up and made you feel good, made you feel happy?
That's a good question. I think as I've gotten older, I focus just more on the overall picture of things. I feel like I'm constantly in my head about tasks that need to be done. And I think when I was a child, you just don't have all these tasks that you have to accomplish. So I think I can't think of a specific example, but I mean, I think it's just you're so much more able to be present as a child because you don't have all these things going through your mind so much. And as I've gotten older, it just becomes more and more of a problem. I'm thinking about tomorrow. I'm thinking about the busy schedule, thinking about paying bills and working shifts. And I feel like the ability to be present, you really have to be intentional about, if that makes sense.
Oh, you do, for sure. And you need to have clarity about what matters. One thing that we do a lot of is, and this is another exercise I bring people through, is I have them come up with 3 what I call big hairy goals. Giant goals. You want to start your own practice. You want to get some kind of a certification. You want to be a private pilot. You've always wanted to do that, but you haven't found the time. Whatever it is that is something that you've always wanted to do. And I have people choose a personal goal, a business goal, and one other, depending on what makes them happy, whether they want. It's different. Again, everybody's different. So you look at those goals and you go through what I call a SWOT analysis. And this is, in the Art of Bending Time, we have a character called Time Suck Ninja. The SWOT analysis is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and risks of each of those goals. And you go through each goal. And then I have people come back to me and I say, okay, you've gone through goal number 1. We go over what they've looked at that they need, that they have, that what it's going to cost, what kind of time it's going to take, what they need to build, if they need education, all that stuff. And then I say, okay, 1 to 10, what's your desire? Answer me right away. And you'd be shocked how many people have been walking around like Santa Claus with his bag on his back, carrying around somebody else's goal that they had for them, or some idea that they've had since they were 10 or 12 years old that it doesn't fit them anymore, or their life. They've outgrown it, but they still think they need to do that. And they're still taking classes towards it and wasting their time and money on it, or they're just worrying about it and they're messing themselves up in the head with it, right? Because they're becoming anxious and beating themselves up about not accomplishing goals that today don't matter so much.
Right.
So that's another thing you want to think about is, are you beating yourself up about things you quote unquote should be doing that aren't important to you. They're important to your maybe it's important to your parents, or it's important to you as a child, or it's important to some aspect of your work that you may be able to make some changes that would make that better.
Yeah.
You may be able to, a lot of people could be delegating things that they don't delegate. That's one thing I see a lot of. A lot of us are micromanagers by nature. And,
Yep.
but the thing we forget, and it was a big thing that I used to do, is I never asked for help for anything. I would join a club and I would become the person who was doing all the work. I'd end up the president of the club, and then I'm doing all the work, and then I'm like, wait a minute, how come nobody's helping me?
Right.
Want to be involved. People want to be recognized as being part of the team and to actually be part of the team. And when we don't allow them that, we lose the opportunity of those relationships, and we feel put upon because we're the one that's doing all the work. And one day we
Yeah.
look around and go, oh, like, how come nobody's helping me? Right. And, that sometimes is as easy as saying, hey, I'm really in the weeds here. Can you help me out?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I struggled with that as a paramedic when, we train new paramedics almost constantly on the ambulance, and you get a brand new paramedic that you're trying to train, but you end up stepping on their toes all the time. You don't let them do any kind of stuff on their own. You jump in too quickly. You don't let them struggle. And I kind of found that as I became a more confident paramedic, my confidence actually allowed me to allow them to run the call and kind of struggle through their own way. And that would actually allow them to grow as opposed to me just jumping in and doing it the way I want to do it. But I think it does require some confidence in your own skills to actually allow somebody else to kind of step in and take on a task. Even if they're not doing it the way you would do it, doesn't necessarily make it wrong, but it makes your job a little bit easier when you're not micromanaging everything.
I think that's
Yeah,
a
and
great
they're
point.
not learning. If you're doing it for them, they won't learn, and then they won't become that competent partner that you need.
Exactly. What are some of the health things that you did that made you feel so much better and rediscover that satisfaction with your job?
It's been it's, and I like to say, I mean, it's multifaceted. So I'm sure the fact that I feel better helps, I was always a runner. I was destroying my body running.
Mm.
So I was running, and then I was getting hurt, and then I was not exercising at all, and then I was running again and getting hurt. And by the time I had a torn meniscus and had surgery, and
Mm.
it snowballed. I actually don't exercise so hard anymore. I walk a lot. I live in downtown Miami. I had to replace tires on my car a couple years ago to go on a trip because my car hadn't moved enough, and the tires had gotten, like, the rubber kind of got ridges in it or something. It was setting up a vibration, and the mechanic was like, you got to get rid of these tires.
Yeah.
So, and that's because I just choose not to drive most places. I walk to the grocery store and carry my stuff home, and I do that because I want the activity. I want to move my body, and I want the exercise.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing that I started doing a lot of is making sure I was getting enough sleep, even when I had a heavy workload. And I'll give you an example. And getting that movement in. There was a time in my career, it's common for lawyers, and I know you guys kind of do this. It's the nature of what you do. You work a certain number of hours, you're not sleeping. Um, I would pull all-nighters. Like, I can't tell you how many times I did that, because for me, the writing process has to have focus. And so I would write all night until something was, due the next day, and there was enough pressure that I had to get it done. And I found I handled a couple of appeals in the end of my career. I wound out the last of my law practice about this time last year. And I had two First Circuit appeals at the end of that case, and had to go to Boston, had to argue, 100 cases in the briefing. And I had to review all this stuff before I went before this panel of judges to argue these arguments. And it was like the biggest thing ever in my career, basically. They were huge. So my family has a house on Cape Cod, and I went there a week in advance just so that I could lock down time to read everything without being interrupted, get a walk on the beach every day, and be in bed by like 10 o'clock. And I knew I could do that if I shut off the distractions, but there was no other way I'd be able to do that. So I did it. Um, I found that if I make those things happen, I feel better the rest of my day. And one of the things I say about, the art of bending time, part of it is making your body work better and your mind work better so that you're more focused and you have better energy. And if you're focused and have better energy, you can probably get twice as much done in the same amount of time that you'd be staring into space. You'd be rereading things because you hadn't read the thing well the first time. It's an incredible amount of wasted time when you're scattered or when you don't feel good.
Absolutely. Yeah, here I call that taking care of yourself before you take care of patients. I think people underestimate the power of sleep and the power of even just getting outside for a walk. I feel like that's something I've incorporated that has helped immensely, because I kind of feel the same way about running. I feel like it takes a huge toll on me mentally and physically, but a walk, that's very achievable every day. I can take the time to actually get outside. And I mean, just getting the sun on you and walking a couple miles, I feel like really changes your mental state, especially going into a busy shift where now you're not going to have any more control over your day. So I try to control my day in that first couple of hours, getting a walk in, some exercise in, hydrating, and then getting that sleep the night before, because I'm a much better provider when I do those things for myself before I'm thrown into kind of the chaos of our busy shifts. Knowing that I've taken that step for myself, I can take so much better care of patients. I'm more efficient. I'm thinking clear. I mean, those are great, simple things that I don't think people prioritize enough.
Exactly. And I would say the other thing I did that was huge was that I had no idea the level of chronic stress I was under, first of all, until I started actively dealing with that stress. And part of that had to do with the mindset shift type of stuff that I told you about. Part of it had to do with physically, I did an elimination diet and I realized I was allergic to gluten. And taking gluten out of my body has literally changed me to the point that when I was in my 30s, I had one episode of brain fog that was so bad. I mean, somebody called me and we talked, and it was clear he'd talked to me before, and I didn't remember him at all.
Oh,
And I found the notes, and he had spoken to me. Like, I had 5 pages of notes. And I was like, this probably was in the early stages of when I was getting PBC. But, I was under a ton of stress. I was maybe dealing with the early stages of an autoimmune disease. And I was living in this state of absolutely chronic inflammation physically, where I didn't even realize it. My ex and I used to buy giant bottles of Advil. We had it everywhere we went. There was a bottle on our boat. There was a bottle in our house. 250, 500 pill bottles, and they were just going away. And just to like live through the normal stuff. And I had joint pain at 30 something. And now I'm 60 and I don't have joint pain and I feel good. And I don't even have those things in my house anymore. Like I don't have any. Recently I broke ribs and I was in the hospital and they were like, well, can you take Tylenol or whatever? I'm like, I'm actually slightly allergic to Tylenol. I had a bad reaction to it at one point. I don't take Tylenol. And they're like, well, how about Advil? I'm like, nope, not taking Advil, screws up your microbiome. I don't touch this stuff. And they're looking at me like, what are you doing here then? What can we do to help you? But at the same time, most of the time I don't need anything like that anymore. And I think that also, it sets up this background noise in your body, right? If you feel like crud, and the crazy part is I didn't know then that I felt like crud. That was normal. But once I learned I could do something about it. Now I realize as soon as something's coming on.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Like people don't realize kind of the slow fade of bad nutrition over time. You don't realize that certain foods and certain macros are really causing this systemic inflammation and they're causing brain fog. For me, just eliminating as much carbs as I can makes a huge difference. I think everyone is a little different, what foods you respond to and how they make you feel. But for me, eating low carb, high protein has made such a huge difference. I feel like I noticed the same thing, like less inflammation, less pain overall. You're taking the ibuprofen and the Tylenol much less frequently. Because, those medicines are not good long term for your kidneys, your liver. I mean, habitually taking that stuff is not good for you. And I don't think most people realize that proper nutrition can really be medicine for you.
Exactly. And the other piece of it, like I said, I mean, there was sort of a coupling of things. There was the physical stuff for sure. Eating right, getting some exercise, getting enough sleep. Then there's the part where you're looking at, am I living for my own goals or am I living for other people's goals? Am I doing this because it's moving me forward or am I doing it because it's a task on the list to check off? And is that something that somebody else could be doing instead of me doing everything? And then there's also, I mean, things about your environment that can help. Like I'm sitting here right now in my home office with the most lovely 1% blackout shade in front of me. For a long time, I didn't have blinds. I had these filmy curtains and I have a western facing window. And so it was like this brutal glaring sunlight would come in the window at sometime in the afternoon. And I'd be like, I couldn't work here. And then I'd trot off with my laptop into the den in my house, which is code for time to watch Netflix. And it's not a comfortable place to sit. So I'm sitting in this weird, I'm on a couch with my laptop. And the next thing I know, I'm watching Netflix instead of doing the work I was going to do. Right.
Yeah.
And that just, then you don't feel like it later. So it just basically screwed half the day because of
Yeah.
light in my face at my desk.
Right.
So, that's another thing people don't think about is just these weird little tweaks that you can do that can make your environment perhaps less distracting.
Yeah, and then isolate you from that, potential scrolling of social media or putting on Netflix in the background and allows you to do dedicated work. I think a lot of people think that you can multitask effectively and, I can get some things done while there's TV on in the background or my phone's sending me notifications, and you completely lose that focused flow state. You can't get into a flow state when you have those constant distractions.
It's a total fallacy. There's a study that I read at one point that said that for every distraction, when you're a focus type worker, it was particularly related to things like law work where you're reading and you need to be focused on what you're doing. You can lose if there's one distraction, it takes you 15 minutes to get back into that flow state.
Yeah, 100%.
Consider the impact on your productivity if you just have your phone notifications on, or like on my computer, no notifications pop up at all when I'm working. I don't have my email pop up. I don't have nothing. I don't see notifications. And that's very deliberate because if I did, there was a time in my life when I'd feel like I had to look at it. And the next thing I know, I'm not getting the thing done. And I'm staying up all night working on something I could have been doing in blocks of time.
Yeah, 100%. In the ER, I find that, we're doing a lot of quick tasks. It's not like I need to sit and be focused for a half an hour. I need to sit and be focused for 5 minutes to properly look at the patient's chart, look at everything they told me, look at the physical exam I did, and then reflect all of that against their workup and decide what to do with a patient. But I need that. I can't be distracted when I'm doing that, or else I have to start the process over again. If a nurse comes up and says, hey, can I have orders for this or that? The better response that I try to tell people is, tell the nurse to put in the order, and then you can sign that order later, so that you're not switching to another screen to do a completely different patient task than the one you're focused on. And that allows me to stay where I'm at mentally, focused on this one patient, make sure we're doing the right thing for them. Otherwise, if I get off track and go put in another order for a patient or do something completely different, I have to go back to that chart and rethink about the physical exam, rethink about everything the patient told me, rethink about the workup. And you're losing precious minutes, in our case, when you allow something to distract you. So I think kind of that delegating thing, a nurse can put in an order, I don't have to go and physically do it, and I can sign that order later. And that allows me to keep my mind on the current task. Otherwise, it resets and I'm wasting minutes doing that, and then I can't go see the next patient, and it just kind of spirals.
Right. And God forbid you lose focus in the middle of your looking at somebody's information and you get it wrong.
Yeah.
Because you weren't focused. And,
Right.
that's nobody wants that, obviously. And you're not going to get through it as fast. I mean, I just found the time of how long things take, if I can focus on them, it's literally cut in half sometimes.
Yeah, I totally believe that. And when you come to work, when I start a shift sleep deprived or not hydrated or have not done anything for myself that day, it completely spins you out of control, and you're not, I can probably look at a patient's workup and their physical exam in 2 minutes, but if I'm tired and sleep deprived, that process is much longer. I'm more likely to miss something important. Being able to focus is such an important point too.
I agree. I agree. And the other thing is to have at least that sense of an overriding meaning to what you're doing in the overall context of what you want in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's a big piece of burnout for people is a lot of people, whether it's, the old school term was midlife crisis, whatever, right? You hit a point where sometimes you go, wait a minute, where'd my life go?
Mm-hmm.
And what am I doing? I wanted to travel. I wanted to be somebody who wrote a book, or I wanted to be somebody who did whatever your thing is. And now you're 40 and you haven't done it yet. And you're going, I just go to work every day and I feel like a gerbil in a habit trail. And, that's when burnout happens, is when people don't feel any meaning in what they're doing and they're working hard and sleep deprived and feeling like they're put upon and all the rest of it. But if you feel like what you're doing isn't aligned with what you want in your life, then you need to find a way to make it aligned or find something else. But if you're, a lot of people I found who think they're burned out and think they want to change careers because of it, when they do these things to make just little tweaks, they go, wait a minute, okay, I don't hate that anymore. I actually like it again. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
getting meaning in it again. Because when you get to that place of burnout where you feel put upon, you feel like you're being used, you feel like you're not, you're the one doing all the work, that coming from that place, you don't see a way out.
Mm-hmm.
You have to kind of like work your way into seeing the light that helps you get out of it. But
Yeah.
you don't see that light if you just stay doing the same stuff.
Yeah.